Hey guys, it is finally that time of year, but we are beginning our coverage of Survivor 45 with the preseason power ranking. And I'll say right at the bat that I think this cast is kind of hard to assess. I think there's a lot of people that could really go either way, and there's just not too many people that I feel that confident about, but we'll be getting to that more in the actual ranking. But there are 18 players to look at, and let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 18, the person I believe is the least likely to win based off my first impressions of them, we do have Kendra. Now, like I said, I think there are multiple people in this cast that I could see being early boots, Kendra being one of them, but I feel like Kendra is probably the person that I got the worst impression from, and I feel like she's probably the person that has the least amount of upside. Now, she is a more recent fan, having only gone to the show in the past year, which is actually a pretty noticeable trend on this season, where a lot of people either got into the show during the pandemic or relatively recently, which is actually different from the last couple seasons. So I feel like that alone is probably not that big of a hindrance. However, I feel like of these people, Kendra probably is the least apt for the game. I feel like she is someone that's here for the adventure. She talks a lot about how she's done like a lot of crazy stuff in her life. And I feel like she's just seeing Survivor as another one of those opportunities. And I feel like even beyond that, the reception she's been getting from her other castmates have been kind of mixed, where Caleb's talked about not really liking her that much. You also have Jake, who sees her as someone that'll just go after the guys, which is interesting. But I feel like in general, Kendra is someone that I could see being an early boot. I feel like this tribe is probably not the best setup for her. And I feel like even if she were to have a deeper run, I just don't really see her garnering the respect. She actually compares herself a lot to Carolyn, who I did have relatively high on the 44 preseason power ranking. However, a lot of that was due to Carolyn being this massive super fan and someone that has played in Orgs and someone that has a lot of self awareness about her issues. And Kendra does have at least some self awareness, but I feel like the game knowledge will not be as strong as Carolyn. And I feel like despite Carolyn being the best case scenario for someone in this archetype, she still got to the end in a spot where she didn't have the respect to win. So if Carolyn couldn't win, then where does that leave Kendra? So I feel like Kendra is someone that I don't feel that great about. Admittedly, I could see other people going out before her, but I feel like on the whole, she has a lower ceiling than a lot of the other players we'll be talking about soon, which is why she is here at number 18. Now moving on to number 17, and I initially had this person a couple spots higher. However, after thinking about some more, I just couldn't really justify it. But here we have Drew. Now, Drew's an interesting one as well, as if you recall from last season, I had Carson very low on my preseason power ranking. However, Carson ultimately defied my preseason thoughts, where he played a dominant game and he was able to build all these great relationships that got him through the game. And obviously, Drew is someone that on paper seems similar, where he is very young. He is someone that's fresh out of school. He talks quite a bit about his schoolwork and how that's prepared him for the game, which, I could do without that. But even then, like, he does talk about working at a call center, talking about how, like, he knows how to build first impressions. So it did seem on the surface that he is someone that could do pretty well. He's also, like, one of the bigger fans on the board, someone that should understand the game a bit. However, after thinking about some more, I just don't feel that great about him. Simply because, like, he is someone that is naturally going to be high variance. He's someone that's, like, not very athletic, someone that people will know will have more going on. And Drew himself has admitted that he is not really going to hide that he's just going to admit that he's going to be the smart guy and he's not even going to play it down. Which already, like, could work, as people will probably, like, think that he's lying if he comes up with something else. However, I think another big knock is the way people talked about him, like, in their first impressions, where several people have been sketched out by him. I mean, Dee in particular noted how he doesn't make eye contact and that, like, he kind of sketched her out. Brandon is someone that has also talked about not wanting to be on a tribe with Drew, as he thinks he'll be the first one out. Caleb is also someone that doesn't exactly have the highest opinion of Drew. So I think those are all things that could make me a bit worried about Drew. I feel like he is someone that will definitely try to play into the nerdy aspect of him. However, he is someone that I don't know if he's going to be able to build the bonds needed to get people on his side. And even if he is able to make a deep run, I feel like his ceiling is probably like a final 8 run, where I could see him, like, if he's able to gain some traction, being sort of like a Will Wall. I think that's probably the best case scenario for him. Someone that's pretty active, someone that's able to make some moves here and there, but someone that's eventually taken out for being a big threat. I just don't really see how he wins the game, even if he gets through those early rounds, which, considering like how people have been talking about him in the preseason, I could see a world where he goes out early if his tribe loses challenges. Now, with that said, he is also on probably one of the stronger tribes physically, where he has Austin and Sifu there. Those are definitely people that could ensure that he doesn't go to tribal early. But even then, I could still see him being taken out because of that. So I think all in all, I just don't feel that great about Drew, both short term and long term, which is why he is here, number 17. Now moving on to number 16, and we have the person that I originally had where Drew is. However, after thinking about it, I did decide to give them the edge, and here we have Emily, who has been pretty notable in the preseason, mainly due to her being compared to Cass, like where she took a personality test and the results came back similar to that of Cass's. And obviously, people have compared her to Cass, and not to mention that Emily herself has made some pretty blatant admissions about her own personality, where she talks about how she's not good at making fire, that she's not very strong, that she's very honest, that she sucks at lying, and that she can be a bit of an irritant. Like she is someone that like is probably going to potentially rub some people the wrong way. And when you look at the way her tribe breaks down, it's very possible that she could be on the outs early on. However, that leads right into the main upside, where I think the main thing that puts her above Drew is that people were more positive on Emily in their first impressions compared to Drew. Where Brandon, someone that's on her tribe, says that she likes Emily. Hannah, who is also on her tribe, also likes Emily. So I think those already are people that she could gravitate towards. And if she's able to get on the same page with those people, she could find herself in a good position initially. However, at the same time, like if her flaws start to come out, maybe she could turn them against her to where she could be an early boot. Not to mention that she is probably going to be a physical weakness on her tribe and challenges early on, so that could also get her in trouble, even if she is able to build good bonds. And I think if she ultimately plays like Cass, then I feel like it'll eventually catch up to her, where even if she is able to make the merge, I feel like she could definitely rub some people the wrong way. I could see a world where people don't respect her gameplay to where they probably wouldn't want to give her a jury vote. So I think those are all things that are really holding her back. And just in general, I find Emily to be pretty high variance, similar to the people we already talked about. But again, those upsides, the fact that Brandon and Hannah are people that she likes and she wants to work with, and that those people are on her tribe, those are all things that could give her some safety in the short term. It was enough to have her at least above Drew, but I think those red flags made it so I couldn't have her any higher than number 16. Now moving on to number 15, and we have someone that's been on my mind for a while now, though I don't really know what this person did to warrant that attention, but here we have Sean. Now, the thing about Sean is he's been on my mind for a while now. You see, one of my Discord members, Bryce, is obsessed with him, and I just don't know why. It just seems sort of a random pick, if you ask me. But now that we have learned a bit more about Sean, seen him in interviews, I do like Sean, but I think he's also someone that's a bit high variance. I think he is someone that is just brimming with personality. He is like very lively in his interviews and all of his press. And I think he's also a pretty big fan of the show. He even had a wedding themed after Survivor. So he clearly knows the game well. And I think he's someone that if he's given some inroads, I think he could do well. The problem is that I think his starting tribe is a bit of a bad landing spot for him, where I could see him being on the outs early on, where I think it could be him or Emily on the outs in those early votes, and I could very easily see the vote shifting to Sean, particularly if Emily's able to build some inroads with the rest of the tribe. So I think that alone is a pretty big knock against him, and a big reason that I feel uncomfortable with putting him too high, not to mention the fact that the tribe in general is probably one of the weaker tribes, so I could see them going to trouble multiple times. I feel like it's just going to be a hard road for Sean to get to the merge unless he's able to really build some inroads early on, which, considering his personality, I could see it happening, though I could also see him like coming off as fake to a lot of people given just how over the top he seems. So I think those are all pretty big concerns. But again, if he's able to break through, if he's able to maybe fly under the radar a bit, I think he's someone that could potentially have some upside. He reminds me a bit of Todd Herzog and someone that could definitely play an active strategic game. It's just a matter of whether he can build the relationships and build the position on his tribe to where he can be in that spot. But I feel like just given his landing spot right off the bat, not to mention his personality, I think those are all things that could get him into some trouble early on. So I think it's for all those reasons that I have to break Bryce's heart and put him here at number 15. Now moving on to number 14, and truth be told, I thought this person was also going to be lower when I initially put this list together. However, after reading their interview, I think they have a bit more upside than I give them credit for, but I still don't think they're going to do that well. And here we have Sabaya. And I think my thing with Sabaya when I was watching like her initial stuff was that she was kind of dry. Like I didn't really get the sense that she knew the game that well. And in general, like I felt like she could have been an early boot, someone that could have been picked off, even though she is someone that seems to be a bit more athletic given she has a military background. However, I think now after reading her interview, I think she's someone that could very well be a leader for her tribe. She's someone that has said that she wants allies that are innately followers, which, like she could get, but I also think there are plenty of self-interested players to where I could see her just being like this leader figure, someone that could try to control everything in through that being early boot, even though like there are people that say that they would be open to working with her early on. But I think even if she were to get deeper into the game, I think she could just eventually get a bit too out in front. Sort of reminds me a bit of like say Drea from 42, be taken out like mid game. So I think she's another player that probably doesn't have a super high ceiling in my personal opinion, but I think her floor has gone up a little bit to where I do give some credence to her potentially being a leader. Where while I thought early on that maybe she could just be like an early boot, I think now like there is like some ways for her to build some inroads. But I think considering the landscape, I still don't think she's someone I have as a super likely winner, which is why she's here at number 14. Now moving on to number 13, and we're continuing with players that I just don't feel that great about, but I think they have less potential to be an early boot than the people already discussed. And here we have Sifu. And I think if we are continuing this trend of comparing people to 44 players and earlier, I think Sifu fits in a lot with Danny from 44, like someone that's very blatantly physical and athletic, and someone that I think could be seen as a figurehead for their alliance. Now, admittedly, I think Sifu's probably less of a fan compared to Danny, where again, he's one of these people that got into the show more recently during the pandemic. And I think he's also one of the least knowledgeable about the game. I mean, where he does talk about wanting to play like really aggressively like Tony, but I think outside of that, like he also talks quite a bit about it being an adventure, talks a lot about his various experiences, and I think he's seeing Survivor in a similar lens. So I don't really know how well he's actually going to play the game, but I think given how big he is physically, I think that's just going to keep him around for a lot of the early game, where I think him along with Austin will be like big anchors for their tribe in the pre-merge. Same thing with D. I don't think they're going to go to a ton of troubles pre-merge anyway. And I think even if they were, I think he would just be such a natural shield for a lot of people to where I don't really see him being targeted unless he just goes completely hog wild with playing the Tony game and just completely overplays his hand. But again, I think more realistically, I think he's probably going to be a bit more calm early on. I don't really see him playing that strategic game. Though to be fair, I also said that about Danny, and I mean we saw how that turned out. But I think similar to Danny, I think he'll eventually just be such a massive threat later on in the game, and I don't really have a ton of faith in him to get out of that mess. So I think Sifu's another one that I just don't have a ton of faith in winning the game, but I think compared to a lot of the people I already discussed, I think he's less likely to be an early boot unless he severely overplays, but I think just inherently he is someone that I think would have some longevity due to his physical strength and just him being like a juicy seal for a lot of other people, which is why he is here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we have yet another high variance player, and I feel like this person's a bit more similar to someone we already talked about. However, I think this person has a bit more opportunities in the game, even though I could see them being an early boot, and here we have Brando. And Brando is pretty interesting, sort of similar to Drew. He is coming off as a bit of a more nerdy figure. He's also one of the younger people in the cast at just 23. And I think Brando is someone that will definitely struggle a bit. I think people could see him as being more intelligent on the surface than he's coming off. Although Brando himself has admitted that he's going to try to come off as like more of a class clown, like he talks about various pranks he's pulled off. And in general, I feel like he is someone that I think will probably not lean as much into the nerdy side. And I think through that, he could potentially come off as a more well rounded person compared to Drew, who I mentioned earlier. Now, yes, there's still the potential for people to see through it and for people to not trust him too much. But again, I feel like Brando is someone that I think is going to come off a bit more effective compared to Drew. Not to mention the fact that people haven't really talked about Brando much in their first impressions, whereas Drew was someone that people talked about being sketched out by. So I think that's another factor in why I have him above Drew. And plus, I think with the tribe breakdown, I think Brando could have some allies here. I mean, I think Bruce is someone he could work with. Kelly is another person I could see him working with. There are definitely options for Brando in the game, although at the same time, I could still see him being an early boot. So I couldn't have him too much higher because of that, but considering those opportunities for him to do better than Drew, I do have him here at number 12. Now we're moving on to number 11, and we have another pretty high variance player, but we are going from the youngest person on the cast to the oldest, and here we have Julie, who is 49, the oldest player on the cast, which I think speaks to the nature of recent casts skewing a bit younger. And I think Julie surprised me a bit with her interview, where she was definitely a bit chipper than I was expecting. She definitely reminds me a lot of T-Bird or Sandy from Survivor Tokensheens, where she seems like she'll be a pretty fun character. And I also think she understands the game pretty well. Like she talks about how she got into the show during Cambodia, which was a pretty interesting entry point, all things considered. But she talks about how she became a lawyer later in life after getting divorced. And I think she also recognizes some of her issues early on about how she is an older woman and that she could be an early boot. I think she'll probably try to keep that target off her back. So I think I do have a bit more faith in Julie than I expected coming into it. Although at the same time, I still think she'll have some of those issues at the beginning where she is a bit of an outlier on her tribe, where she's going to be on the tribe with the likes of Sifu and Austin. So I think it could be a bit hard for her to integrate early on. She could be an early boot because of that. But I think if she's able to find her footing, she'll be able to do well. She might be able to be a factor later on in the game. But I think similar to other older women that we've seen in recent years, people like Chrissy from HHH, both Carolyn's from Worlds Apart and 44, I think she will struggle to garner respect within the game. I think she's someone that, even if she is able to play an active game, she may struggle to convey that to the jury in a way that will give her the win. Mind you, I think she is somewhat aware of that, but I still think it'll be an obstacle for her to overcome. So I think those are all factors that make her a bit lower on the list for me, but I still think she is open to surprising me. But for now, I do have her here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and I'm sure some people probably have this person a bit higher on their rankings. However, I think this person could be in some danger, if I'm being perfectly honest, though I could also see them doing well. But here we have J Maya. Again, one of the younger players on the cast. Also one of the bigger names, as she is apparently this musician. She's like gotten some traction online because of that. And I think J Maya will be an interesting figure here. Now again, she is one of the more recent fans where she got into the show during the pandemic. Yeah, like, and for the most part, she seems like she understands the game. Like, she talks about how she wants to work with a lot of the women. She cites a lot of powerful women in her interview, talking about Parvati and Marianne. I think she'll be this person that takes up the mantle of ensuring the women don't get voted out early, as that was something that was brought up in several of the interviews, that people recognize this trend of young women being taken out in the pre-merge. And I think this season will have some efforts to counteract that, where I think people will be conscious of that. And through that, I could see J Maya gain some traction because of it. But at the same time, I also think J Maya runs a pretty big risk of getting too out in front early on. I could see her being the leader for her alliance. I could also see people seeing her as this under the radar threat that needs to be taken out early. Where there was one interesting bit that I got from Sabaya's interview where she was talking about her first impressions, and she noted that J Maya was taking notes of everyone during their time on Ponderosa. And through that, Sabaya concluded that J Maya was pretty analytical and intuitive. And I could see that working against J Maya, where people could see that she's just playing the game pretty hard, and people could think that, oh, we can't let this woman get too far because she will just run the game and everything. So I think that was also kind of a red flag for me to where I could very easily see her being taken out in the pre-merge. But at the same time, I think she's someone that will at least have some traction early on, and I think she is someone that could make for interesting TV. But I think as it is, I think those red flags were enough to keep her here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have someone that got talked about a lot during the preseason. And I did want to put this person lower because of all we were hearing about them. But considering that everyone else has more blatant ways that they can go out early, I couldn't fully justify it. Though at the same time, I don't think this person's winning. And here we have Caleb. Now, straight up, I don't think Caleb is going to win this game, mainly because so many people were talking about him during the preseason, where he really just went out of his way on Ponderosa to make for great impressions of people. Like he is someone that really smiled at everyone, like make eye contact with them, and people know that. Tons of people noted that, and they're talking about Caleb. Though at the same time, plenty of people also recognize that Caleb is just playing them, and that he is someone that's just gonna make everyone feel good about him, and that he doesn't really have any true allegiances because of that. And I think already that's just a pretty massive red flag. I could see people like feeling the same way about him once on the island, to where I could see Caleb becoming a pretty massive threat because of that. You also have the fact that Caleb himself really wants to be a villain this season, where he wants to like play this more villainous game, sort of similar to what we saw with Danny from 44, but I think upping that to a degree. Now, with that said, part of the reason why I have Caleb higher is I think he'll at least have some people early on. Like, there are still some people that I think he'll gravitate towards. I think people will see him at least as a shield and a leader for their alliance. And I think that could gain some traction early on. But there's no way anyone's going to let this guy go towards the end. Like, the fact that people are already recognizing that he is just playing everyone in the preseason is a pretty bad sign in my personal opinion. And I think that's a big reason that I can't really have many higher than here. And actually, part of the reason why I consider putting him lower. But I think he is still someone that I think could be a force within the game. And I think there's at least some world where if he somehow gets to the end, he'll probably win, or at least more likely than a lot of people already talked about. But again, I just don't see it happening. I think too many people are already catching on to him, and because of that, I do have him here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, and we're finally talking about him. The biggest name coming into the season, we do have Bruce. And obviously, Bruce has been the talk of the town ever since the 44 premiere, where Jeff made it pretty clear that he wanted to bring Bruce back onto a future season. Bruce accepted, and now here he is, the first returning player in the new era. Who could have guessed? And I think Bruce is actually in an interesting spot coming into the season, where there's plenty of debate over whether he would be like Francesca, someone that will be taken out right away due to him being this returning player. However, that doesn't seem to be the case, as it seems like virtually everyone on the cast at least recognizes him. And plus, multiple people have explicitly said that they want to work with Bruce coming into the season, which I think makes sense given, one, there's probably a chance that Bruce pregame with them, given his status. But also, I think Bruce is someone that doesn't seem to be that much of a gamer. I think people didn't really see him as that threatening of a player coming into the season. And I think with the unknown, given that he didn't really play on 44, that people will probably underestimate him and will be happy to take him under his wing, where I could very easily see him being the leader of his alliance early on. So I think that's a pretty massive advantage going into the season. I don't really see Bruce being taken out in the pre-merge, again, unless he severely overplays. But I think more than likely, I think Bruce will probably get to the merge. And I think at that point, like, he is someone that I think maybe could run into some trouble. Where I think part of the reason why I can't put Bruce any higher is that I think Bruce will eventually just fall into this trap of being this big threat that's taken out like around the final 7, final 8. And I don't think he's that good of a player to where he can really get out of that. And I think on the whole, my overall assessment of him as a player is largely unchanged. Where I said at the time of 44 that I think he's someone that, like, is a bit of a weird figure, but probably someone that'll be mostly loyal to his group. And I think he is someone that will probably play the position that he's given pretty well. And I think it's that position that puts him this high on the list. But with that said, I don't think he's going to be that great of a player in the grand scheme of things. Just someone that's just going to be in a good spot and is eventually taken out due to him being a big threat. But I think with the amount of people talking about wanting to work with him and the fact that I don't think he's a terrible player, I think 8 is a pretty good spot for him. Now moving on to number 7, and I wasn't entirely sure what to do with this person either. And I feel like if this had been another cast, that this person might have been a little bit lower. However, I think given the field that we have here, I did decide that this is probably the best spot for them. And here we have Hannah. Now I do worry about Hannah early on. I think she's someone that could fall into this trap of like the David Wrights or the Aubreys of not really fitting in socially to begin with, like where I could see her being on the outs initially early on. However, I think something that kind of boons her is the fact that she is on a tribe that I think works for her. Like, I could very easily see her bonding with the likes of Brandon and Emily to where that could be a pretty solid core there. She has also talked about wanting to work with Sabaya. I think that's something that could very much help her in the game. And I think if she's able to get through the pre-merge, I think she'll be in a pretty solid spot afterwards, sort of like Aubrey from Ko Wrong. But with that said, I could also see her tribe going to tribal quite a bit in the pre-merge, and I could see her falling victim to that as well. So there are still definitely some issues that I have with her early on that keeps her a bit lower. However, I think compared to a lot of these other high variance players, I think she's probably one that could get through that a lot more than the people I already talked about. So I think it's for those reasons that I have her this high on the list, though I feel like my top 6 are a bit more solid, and because of that, she is here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have someone that I feel mostly good about, though I could still see them potentially being an early boot depending on how well they do, and here we have D. Now I think D is a pretty interesting figure. I think she's someone that I think will definitely be good physically and socially, where she is someone that's into CrossFit, and she is someone that I could see bonding with a lot of people. So I think that's definitely something that'll put her in a decent spot early on. And even though she is, again, another one of these more recent fans, she also seems like someone that's done a lot of research where she has listened to RJP, she's listened to past winners' interviews. So I think she's someone that at least understands the game as well. Now, whether she'll overplay is another factor. I think that's probably the one spot that I could see her going early on, where maybe she takes all this information and just tries to do everything, and I think that could potentially blow up in her face. But for the most part, I think she's someone that will probably get the game. She's someone that I think will probably lean into her strengths, and I think she's someone that could do very well. And I think considering that she seems to be on the more physical tribe, I think she probably will not go to tribal much in the pre-merge, and I think if she's able to make the merge, I think she'll be able to do fine. So I think those are all things that make me feel pretty good about D, though we'll have to see how it truly pans out. But for now, I did decide to leave her here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we have someone that I think will be a pretty strong player, given that they are a bigger fan, though it wouldn't surprise me if they were a bigger target by the end of it, but we do have Jake. Now, Jake is pretty interesting, where I feel like he's definitely been involved with the show for longer, having watched it since One World and getting all in during Philippines. He also mentions Chris Doherty during his interview, which I think was a pretty interesting grab there, definitely showing that he understands the show's history pretty well. Though at the same time, like, I found it pretty humorous, like how he was like saying that he wants to BS his way through the entire game, which I don't know how well that really worked, but I still think he'll be someone that'll be pretty effective within the game. He is also going to be on a pretty interesting starting tribe where he'll be on the tribe with Bruce, someone that he explicitly said they want to work with. And plus, I can see him connecting with a bunch of people on his tribe. I mean, he's even talked about wanting to work with Kendra. Seeing Kendra as someone that'll probably target the guys, though I'm not entirely sure how true that'll be. Though I can definitely see him integrating well within this tribe, and I feel like he has a lot of the skills to get through a lot of the game. Though with that said, I do worry a bit that he could overplay to a degree, and plus I could still see him falling into this mold of being this big target by the end of the game. So I do worry a bit for Jake in that regard, but I still feel like he'll be a very fun person to see, and I think he'll be pretty capable of the game. But I think those issues held me back to a degree, which is why he is here at number 5. Now I'm moving on to number 4, and I really went back and forth with this person, as I feel like just based off their interview, I didn't get the greatest sense of how they'll do within the game. However, listening to them, I do feel a bit more confident, but here we have Katura, and I wasn't really sure what to make of Katura, where a lot of her interview is her talking about her civil rights work and how she sees like her experience as a black queer woman as being a sufficient life experience for the game. And she doesn't really get into too much detail about that per se, but I could definitely tell like she definitely connects a lot of her life experience to her work as being a civil rights lawyer, and all that's pretty good. And it's great work that she does, but with that said, I did question to a degree, like, how that would actually translate to the game. However, actually listening to her talk, like I feel like she's someone that will connect greatly with a lot of people. I feel like she's pretty good socially. I feel like she is someone that recognizes the need to come off as soft energy. She definitely connects well with those people. She wants to be a bit of a low key character, but admits at the same time that her personality probably won't show it. So I feel like she has some self awareness that I feel like could help her out within the game as well. Now, yes, she is one of the more recent super fans as well, only having gone in during the pandemic. But I feel like compared to a lot of the other people that already talked about, I feel like her issues weren't as blatant to me in her interview. Where yes, it wasn't great that she wasn't delving too deeply into the strategy of the game. But with that said, I still feel like she is someone that I could see connecting well with a lot of her tribe, and I feel like that naturally puts her a bit higher on the list. Though at the same time, I feel like she could still kind of go either way for me, but it's for all those reasons that I do have her here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3, and for me, these top 3 are my top contenders going into the season, whereas I feel like everyone we already talked about before was either high variance or with the last few people we talked about were kind of just fine. But I feel like these top 3 definitely gave me the best vibe, and I could very well see one of these 3 winning or at least doing very well in the season. But at number 3, we probably have the person that I think will have the toughest road to getting to the end, and here we have Austin. And I found Austin's to be a pretty strong candidate. Like, he seems pretty well rounded, pretty good physically, pretty good socially, pretty good strategically. He's also a pretty big fan of the show, having been involved with it for a while. He understands the game. And plus, I think that has translated to his first impressions, where multiple people have talked about wanting to work with Austin. Many people feel good about him, and I feel like that's a pretty good sign for him coming into this season. So I feel like he is someone that'll probably have a pretty good run within him, and I think he'll have the tools to be able to get through a lot of the game. However, at the same time, he is also someone that does relate quite a bit to the underdogs, and I feel like he might run into the situation towards the end of the game where he'll probably be at the bottom. And I could very easily see him becoming like a Jay Starrett figure, someone that is going to be the scrappy underdog, someone that might need to win challenges to get towards the end, someone that may need to find idols. And I feel like that could definitely get into his way in terms of getting to the very end. And plus, like, I could definitely see him just being sniped out along the way. So I feel like that was enough of a concern to where I couldn't quite have him as my winner candidate. Though I feel like he definitely checks off a lot of boxes for me, and I could very well see him doing well in the season. But was those concerns that left him here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and we have another player that I feel pretty solid about. And sort of similar to Austin, there is a world where I could see them being taken out before the end, though at the same time, I feel like that's a bit less likely. And here we have Brandon. And Brandon's another one, is a pretty massive super fan, also someone that's been received very well by the other players on Ponderosa, and I feel like that'll translate to the game, where he does seem to be a very endearing person. Where yes, I guess one downside is the fact that he talks so much about his paranoia and how he almost didn't get on the plane, but I feel like his energy will be pretty infectious once it gets out onto the island, and I feel like he'll be able to navigate through a lot of the game. And I feel like, unlike Austin, I feel like he'll probably be less likely to be targeted due to his sheer physicality, though at the same time, I do also worry about him just being a natural big target around the end game, sort of similar to what we saw with the likes of Omer or Ricard at the end of 41 and 42 respectively. I could kind of see Brandon fall into that mold, Jesse as well, if you want to continue with these comparisons. So I think that'll also be a concern for him, where I could see him just being a big target towards the end game. I could also see a world where he could maybe fall into the Owen trap, where he is just, even though he's a super fan, someone that could be a bit ineffective. Though at the same time, I feel he'll be able to endear himself enough to where he'll be able to counteract that. So I think on the whole, Brand is someone that I feel very confident about. I feel like he's someone that'll have a pretty deep run on the season. I feel like he'll be on a good starting tribe where he has a lot of people that wants to work with him. And in general, I feel like he'll be pretty effective at the game. It's just that I still do worry about him being targeted towards the very end. That does make me knock him down to a degree. Though at the same time, he'll be a pretty interesting character in the season. But it's for all those reasons that I have him here at number 2. And now, at number 1, my winner pick going into Survivor 45 is Kelly. Now, I will admit that one potential downside to Kelly as a candidate is that she could have a run similar to that of Sarah Wade from last season, where on paper she seems to be a pretty well-rounded player, though in execution is someone that could just lose control early on and never really recover that. Though at the same time, like I feel like Kelly, the main thing that distinguishes her from Sarah is that I feel like she's probably going to be a more hourly empathetic player, someone that I feel like will be able to use her experience as a nurse in order to build connections with people. And plus, I feel like this is a decent tribe for her, where I could see her connecting with the likes of Brando, with Jake, with Katora especially. Even Bruce is someone that I could see her connecting with. I feel like Kelly is going to be on a pretty good starting tribe, unlike Sarah, who is on a tribe of mostly wacky characters. I feel like that alone will allow Kelly to gain a bit more of a foothold in the game early on. I also feel like she is someone who, unlike the likes of Austin and Jake, is probably going to be less likely to be targeted in the end game if she's in that spot, though at the same time is someone that I have plenty of confidence in to navigate through the game based on our understanding of the game strategically and socially. Now, yes, she is a more recent fan than Austin or Jake, but it's still someone that has mostly picked up the game. And still, I mean, if we are considering the cast on the season, she is still someone that is on par with the rest of the season. I don't think she's at a significant disadvantage. So I feel like those are all things that just make me feel pretty good about Kelly, enough to make her my winner pick. However, going by my more recent track record, that could just doom her to be a pre-merge boot. But I feel like based on the information that I have right now, Kelly is the one that I feel the most comfortable having as my winner pick, and because of that, she is here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps out with the channel. Now, once the season starts on this Wednesday, I'll be updating these power rankings weekly. And obviously, these opinions will change once we actually know what's going to happen, so stay tuned for that. Big Brother 25 is still going strong, so you can expect weekly power rankings for that. And Amazing Race 35 is also starting, so you can expect power rankings for that as well. And Survivor UK is yet another show that is supposed to be starting soon, so you can expect power rankings for that once that comes out. Also, you can check me out on Patreon. I do have a Patreon, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, click the link in the description. And if you haven't already, be sure to join the Discord server, which you can join by clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that's the video. See ya.